No, said Olga. Nobody ought to be blamed. Nobody could have done anything else. All that was already due to the influence of the castle. Influence of the castle, repeated Amalia, who had slipped in unnoticed from the courtyard. The old people had been long in bed. Is it castle gossip you're at, sitting with your heads together? And yet you wanted to go away immediately when you came, Kay, and it's nearly 10 now. Are you really interested in that kind of gossip? There are people in the village who live on it. They stick their heads together, just like you two, and entertain each other by the hour. But I didn't think that you were one of them. On the contrary, said Kay, that's exactly what I am, and moreover, people who don't care for such gossip and leave it all to others don't interest me particularly. Indeed, said Amalia. Well, there are many different kinds of interests, you know. I heard once of a young man who thought of nothing but the castle day and night. He neglected everything else, and people feared for his reason. His mind was so wholly absorbed by the castle. It turned out at length, however, that it wasn't really the castle he was thinking of, but the daughter of a charwoman in the offices up there. So he got the girl and was all right again. I think I would like that man, said Kay. As for your liking the man, I don't doubt it, said Amalia. It's probably his wife you would like. Well, don't let me disturb you. I've got to go to bed, and I must put out the light for the old folks' sake. They're sound asleep now, but they don't really sleep for more than an hour, and after that the smallest glimmer disturbs them. Good night. And actually, the light went out at once, and Amalia bedded herself somewhere on the floor near her parents. Who's the young man she mentioned? Asked Kay. I don't know, said Olga. Perhaps Brunswick? Although it doesn't fit him exactly. But it might have been somebody else. It's not easy to follow her, for often one can't tell whether she's speaking ironically or in earnest. Mostly she's in earnest, but sounds ironical. Never mind explaining, said Kay. How have you come to be so dependent on her? Were things like that before the catastrophe? Or did it happen later? And do you never feel that you want to be independent of her? And is there any sense in your dependence? She's the youngest and should give way to you. Innocently or not, she was the person who brought ruin on the family. And instead of begging your pardon for it anew every day, she carries her head higher than anybody else, bothers herself about nothing except what she chooses to do for her parents. Nothing would induce her to become acquainted with your affairs, to use her own expression. And then if she does speak to you at all, she's mostly in earnest, but sounds ironical. Does she queen it over you on account of her beauty, which you've mentioned more than once. Well, you are all three very like each other, but Amalia's distinguishing mark is hardly a recommendation, and it repelled me the first time I saw it. I mean her cold, hard eye. And although she's the youngest, she doesn't look it. She has the ageist look of women who seem not to grow any older, but seem never to have been young either. You see her every day. You don't notice the hardness of her face. That's why, on reflection, I can't take Sortini's passion for her very seriously. Perhaps he sent the letter simply to punish her, but not to summon her. I won't argue about Sortini, said Olga. For the castle gentleman, everything is possible. Let a girl be as pretty or as ugly as you like. But in all the rest, you're utterly mistaken so far as Amalia is concerned. I have no particular motive for winning you over to Amalia's side. And if I try to do it, it's only for your own sake. Amalia, in some way or other, was the cause of our misfortunes. That's true. But not even my father, who was the hardest hit, and who was never very sparing of his tongue, particularly at home. Not even my father has ever said a word of reproach to Amalia, even in our worst times. Not because he approved of her action. He was an admirer of Sortini's, and how could he have approved of it? He couldn't understand it even remotely. For Sortini, he would have been glad to sacrifice himself and all that was his, although hardly in the way things actually happened, as an outcome, apparently, of Sortini's anger. I say apparently, for we never heard another word from Sortini. If he was reticent before then, from that day on, he might as well have been dead. Now, you should have seen Amalia at that time. We all knew that no definite punishment would be visited on us. We were only shunned by the village and by the castle. But while we couldn't help noticing the ostracism of the village, the castle gave us no sign. Of course, we had no sign of favor from the castle in the past. So, how could we notice the reverse? The blankness was the worst of all. It was far worse than the withdrawal of the people down here, for they hadn't deserted us out of conviction. Perhaps they had nothing very serious against us. They didn't despise us then as they do today. They only did it out of fear, and we were waiting to see what would happen next. And we weren't afraid of being stranded, for all our debtors had paid us. The settling up had been entirely in our favor, and any provisions we didn't have were sent us secretly by relations. It was easy enough for us. It was harvest time, that we had no fields of our own, and nobody would take us on as workers. So that for the first time in our lives, we were condemned to go nearly idle. So there we sat, all together with the windows shut in the heats of July and August. Nothing happened. No invitations, no news, no callers, nothing. Well, said Kay, since nothing happened and you had no definite punishment hanging over you, what was there to be afraid of? What people you are,